Hey everybody, this is Minion Soldier, and this is the Piracy Show. Now, beam weapons, of course, big news on Friday. Are they coming? Will we see them? We don't know yet. What form will they take? We don't know. And in truth, like when I look at them, I still question, the aesthetic of them. But the truth is, it doesn't matter if I like the aesthetic or not. I mean, realistically, all it is in the end, when you break it down to its basic components, all it is in the end is it's an animation and a sound that tells you just did 100 damage or 50 damage or 1500 damage to the enemy ship, or you missed. That's pretty much all that it is. It realistically, I mean, all it is it's just an audio and visual signal that a mathematical equation took place, and either you hit or you didn't, and you subtracted X amount of hit points from the enemy ship if you actually hit. That's all that it really is. Like, so for me to sit there and say, I don't really like the aesthetic, it's not really, I don't know if it's really Star Citizen. It doesn't matter because, I mean, even in the end, aesthetics generally don't play that heavily into my gameplay. To a certain degree. I mean, World of Warcraft's different, but that's, I'm big into transmogging in that game, but the truth is because it never affects my gameplay, though, right? Like, if it was something that affected my character or lowered my DPS or something like that, I'd be like, no. Like, I'll do things for cosmetic reasons, certainly, but not in a way that impedes gameplay, and I think that's a theme that I've touched on many times talking about spaceships as well. There are great ships and then there are less than great ships, and I think that sometimes people they confuse an aesthetic with performance, and so generally that's kind of one of the points that I tend to argue quite a lot. But overall, beam weapons in-game or in-game, even if they are in game, I'm not going to raise a fuss about them. I don't know if it quite fits the Star Citizen aesthetic, but that's my opinion on a subjective matter, right? So, my opinion in that case doesn't matter, and it shouldn't impact anybody else's life. But it did get me thinking, and it has to do largely with the weapons on ships and turrets in general. Now, for those of us who have tried out turrets in 3.0 and had, let's say, mixed results with them, I wanted to do a little bit more testing this weekend, but unfortunately those opportunities didn't really open up, and when I was able to log on, the servers were exceptionally not great this weekend. So hopefully at some point soon I can get some more testing in, but I think the turret gameplay is probably going to be a problem. Just because, there's kind of an idealization of turret gameplay. A lot of it kind of evolves from the ideas of, say, like a B-17, certainly in the Retaliator's case, flying at high altitude. It's more or less a stable platform, unless, of course, something really bad happens. It's more or less a stable platform to shoot from. I mean, you have to account for deflection, things like that, but more or less, it's a stable platform. And certainly, like, these larger ships, once they're going up at full speed, if a fighter's trying to chase you down and all of a sudden he's got to turn to get out of the way of one of your turrets, well, he's just kind of, because that's 6 degrees of freedom and our Newtonian physics, he's just going to kind of slide for a while before he can get control of his ship. And if he hits boost, he might black out and just end up hanging in the sky and making himself a perfect target. But turret gameplay in general, I don't know, does it really feel right? Does it is it something that feels like it really works? The more I look at ships, and I'm talking about not just like the naval ships, sort of like the Polaris, the Hammerhead, Javelin, Idris, and so on, but even ships like the Caterpillar and whatnot, the more I look at ships like that and I look at their defense systems, I kind of look at them and I kind of think, like, wouldn't these be automated? Like, wouldn't you be in a position where, let's say, you're a pilot of a Caterpillar, right? And you have, your pilot and your co-pilot station, and you got your bridge stations in the back. Maybe one of those stations is used for an officer who's designated to control weapons, and they don't maybe directly control those weapons. Like, you can have someone go and man that turret and just do their thing, but you can also have, the server blade idea where it's controlled by the ship's computer, and you more or less end up, just assigning targets from a list. I kind of think that with the larger ships is something that makes more sense, especially when you get into the larger naval stuff, And I want to hear more about those systems. I want to hear more about the automated turrets. I mean, whether it's beam weapons, flak guns, laser repeaters, whatever, I would like to hear more about that. That's some information that I would really, that's something I would really like to find out about. I kind of, I like the idea of having a weapons officer who assigns targets and then basically, flicks the gun onto auto. And then it becomes a question of how well the ship is equipped, how good is the ballistic software or the targeting computer, whatever it ends up being called. How good is that hardware at tracking, a single target, no matter how fast it's moving. And for a fighter pilot, you could use things like chaff and flares to confuse those systems. And so you would have some interesting gameplay there, and you could layer your gameplay around that. So it just wouldn't be, oh, I see it, I highlight this person's name on a list, I flick the auto button, and they're dead. It actually, it becomes a question of skill, equipment, and something like that. That is something I would really like to hear more about. When thinking of this stuff and when kind of turning this around in my head, of course, had to watch a few choice episodes of Star Trek, which ended up turning into something of a Star Trek Deep Space Nine Dominion War mini marathon. And the more I watched it, and the more I looked at it, it kind of made sense to me that, especially in cases of the larger ships, now I'm not talking about this Cutlass here, but maybe things like the Caterpillar and on up, you might be in a situation where, for the sake of simplicity, day in, day out, you might move to like an automated system like that. Now, of course, you can put NPCs in the turrets, I guess, or you can have the turrets operate remotely, but with obvious costs, right? Like, you could sit there and you could say, okay, you can build so that the guns on, let's say, your Hammerhead are super, super accurate, but the cost of going all the way to that level of accuracy is the fact that they really don't handle electronic countermeasures all that well. Flares, chaff, that sort of thing. Whereas if you take away a little bit of that accuracy and build in a little of that resilience against countermeasures, you might end up in a much better position, or a much more balanced position to use those weapons in that way remotely. And even though we do have like all these man turrets, I mean, that still gives you the option that if you want someone to go and hop in that turret and actually man that turret, then there's a certain level of expertise that a player can bring to the situation that a ballistic computer may not be able to, right? Like, a player can say, not only do I know how to hit this ship, but I know where to hit this ship. In the case of, a much larger ship, where you might have a little bit more freedom as to where your shots are going to land, versus aiming at a little fighter that's dodging around you. They might look at it and say, well, if I hit the little exhaust port right below the main port, that can sometimes trigger a chain reaction in the reactor core, something like that. And it's funny because it all came about because of the beam weapons, and then on into Star Trek, and all this kind of came to mind. It just, to me, it seems like for the larger ships that this would almost be a better system. And it's something I would like to find more about. Having all these different people having to man all these different turrets on ships, it seems almost a little unnecessary, almost a little overdone. And I really do want to hear more about automated turrets. Now, I don't think that there should ever be just a case of full automation, you know, to the point of you just flick a switch and anything that's hostile that comes within 1,500 meters instantly gets liquidated. But something that at least you could hand off to a weapons control officer. Great warping point, bouncing off an asteroid. But yeah, something that you could hand off to a weapons control officer that could be a little bit more specific in the task and at least know which ships are a priority to shoot down first versus others. Or at the most basic level for a single player, at least being able to say, okay, target this and engage this target, you know, something that you could do through voice commands even, where you say, target that ship and fire, and it'll shoot and it'll do its thing, but it's not going to be all that intelligent about how it does it. Whereas having a player at least micromanage your turrets from a weapon control station would be better. And then ultimately, if you're willing to go to that length, having a bunch of players manning all your turrets with that knowledge and that expertise might be sort of like the ultimate level of performance of those turrets. But I think that weapons control officer, I think, would be a really good middle ground. And I wish we knew more about CIG's plans, or at least their thoughts and ideas on these types of systems. But, you know, ultimately it's a wait and see thing. I guess we have to wait and see. But I want to close things out on a final point. Just something that I've noticed in general with CIG, especially so far this year, is that the quality of the video content, the informative nature of the video content that we've been getting this year with Ask the Devs, with Reverse the Verse, all that has been fantastic. Absolutely fantastic, and I hope it continues. This, I mean, in terms of video content, in terms of information and dissemination of that information, the content that CIG has been putting out this year has been night and day compared with last year. It has absolutely been great. And I used to find myself kind of going and watching videos, especially over the last year, and just kind of popping through them and just trying to get basically like the shortened version, the short and sweet of what they were saying, and not really paying that much attention to it. But this year's content has been absolutely fantastic, and now I'm having to train myself out of that habit and actually sit down and really make the time to watch all this stuff, in full, just because it has been so informative and of such better quality that I've been very, very happy to be a subscriber and support the content that they've been putting out so far this year. It's been great. It has been absolutely a dream come true, and I hope it continues. Anyways, that's the show for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.